let me juxtapose two things for you here. Robert Reich wrote this brilliant piece for the Huffington Post. This was published, I think, yesterday. What is today? The 18th? It was the day before yesterday. Called The Myth of the Free Market and How to Make the Economy Work for Us. And I've been saying this for years. I mean, if you've been, a regular listener to or viewer of this program, you probably can recite this in your sleep. But there is no such thing as a free market. It just plain old flat out doesn't exist. And Robert Reich comes right out and says that. In fact, he says not only does a free market, well, first of all, he points out this meme that the right wing wants us to believe. Right? That the free market is infinite in its wisdom. The free market solves all problems. As to quote Robert Reich, our former labor secretary in the Clinton administration, the best cabinet officer of any presidency in, I was going to say in my lifetime, but at least since I've been an adult. He says, one of the most deceptive ideas continuously sounded by the right and their fathomless think tanks and media outlets is that the free market is natural and inevitable, existing outside and beyond government. And by this view, he says, if some people aren't paid enough to live on, markets determine they're not worth enough. If others rake in billions, they must be worth it. If millions of Americans are unemployed or their paychecks are shrinking or they work 2 or 3 part-time jobs, no idea what they're going to make next month or next week, hey, that's too bad. That's just the way the market works. Because the free market knows best, right? And then Robert Reich, this guy's a real economist, right? He says, in reality, the free market is a bunch of rules about one, what can be owned and traded? The genome, slaves, nuclear materials, babies, votes. So we regulate what can be traded and owned. 2, on what terms things can be traded? Equal access to the internet, right to organize unions, corporate monopolies, how long patent protections last. Number 3, under what conditions? Which drugs are legal to sell and which ones aren't? What about unsafe foods, deceptive Ponzi schemes, uninsured derivatives, dangerous workplaces? Number 4, what's private and what's public? Police, roads, clean air, clean water, healthcare, good schools, parks and playgrounds. And number 5, how to pay for what? Do we pay for things with taxes, with users' fees, with individual pricing, and so on? He says these rules don't exist in nature. They're human creations. Governments don't intrude on free markets. Governments organize and maintain them. Markets aren't free of rules. The rules are what create the market. And then he goes on to say, but the rich don't want you to know this. They want you to think that there's some sort of magical thing. In a recent column for the Wall Street Journal, Cypress Semiconductor president and CEO and rich guy T.J. Rodgers tried to defend capitalists and in the process showed that he really doesn't understand how markets work at all. Rodgers' editorial was pretty much your standard right-wing talking point piece about how important so-called job creators are to the economy. Without rich people like him, he said, there would be no investors, no businesses, and no jobs, and therefore raising taxes on rich people like him is counterproductive because it sucks away from capital from the people who can best use it. To prove his point, Rodgers used his own example. He said, and this is what he wrote in the Wall Street Journal, he said, a couple of years ago, I decided to invest in my hometown of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, by building a $1.2 million lakefront restaurant. That restaurant now permanently employs 65 people at an investment of $18,000 per job, a figure consistent with U.S. small businesses. If progressive taxation in the name of fairness had taken my extra $1.2 million and spent it on a government stimulus program, would 65 jobs have been created? End of quote. Now, other than being one of the most stupid questions I've ever seen, even a rhetorical question in the Wall Street Journal, what Rodgers is saying here is that he is responsible for the jobs created by his restaurant and that any attempt to raise taxes on wealthy individuals like him would take away the resources necessary to create jobs. And this kind of argument has become so common, so ingrained in the right-wing meme machine in the 32 years since Reagan took office, that it's easy to forget how wrong it is. Contrary to what Rodgers claims in this Wall Street Journal piece, business owners don't create successful businesses or the jobs that they generate. Consumers do. If he had no customers in his restaurant, he wouldn't have a restaurant. Despite what you may hear from the talking heads on Fox so-called news and CNBC, economies are driven from the ground up, from the bottom up. They're run on demand by how much consumers actually want to buy goods or services. If a business doesn't meet an existing demand in the workplace, in the marketplace, or create demand through innovation, it won't succeed. It's that simple. I know this firsthand. Back in the 80s, Louise and I started a travel agency down in Atlanta. I didn't have a lot of cash. We'd been running a home for abused kids. I was pretty broke. So I used my $15,000 line of credit from my American Express card as our startup capital. I took a risk. And what made that risk turn into a $6 million a year business within 3 years and gave our travel agency an edge over its competitors is the same thing that gave TJ Rodgers' business an edge over his competitors. We met a demand in the marketplace. Unlike other travel agencies, ours identified a niche of smaller businesses or less frequent travelers to serve. The big travel agencies like American Express only wanted the business of the big corporations, and the small travel agencies only wanted to sell cruises to rich people. There's nobody in our growing part of Atlanta who wanted the smaller business travelers. So we were ahead of the curve, and we were rewarded for it by both making a lot of money and having our business featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Although much of it happened after we sold that business in 1968, that little company we started on my $15,000 line of credit went on to sell over $250 million worth of travel. And then just 3 years ago, merged with a multi-billion-dollar travel company. As long as our economy, unfortunately, it was long after I sold it, as long as our economy is based on some sort of free market system, businesses are going to succeed or fail based on market demand for their services. And that's why TJ Rodgers' argument that wealthy people are responsible for the jobs their businesses create is crazy. Even if the government did tax him so highly that he couldn't use his own money to finance his restaurant, he could have taken out a line of credit like the way we started our travel agency, like most small businesses do. And his restaurant still would have generated the jobs he brags about in his Wall Street Journal column. And it would have generated those jobs because it met a niche of demand in the Oshkosh, Wisconsin marketplace. The big secret that right-wingers like TJ Rodgers don't want you to know is that we don't need wealthy entrepreneurs like him to make businesses successful. Worker cooperatives can do it. Entrepreneurs can do it. People like me with a line of credit with American Express. And we started this radio show in my living room with nothing. This is how business should be done and can be done in America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And once we get the giant monopolies out of the way, if we'd only enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act, starting small business right now is an all-time low because of this crazy Reaganomics.